From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., GOLE on Congress. The program discussing national issues that affect Oklahoma. Your host, U.S. Representative Tom Cole.
Thank you for joining me today for another episode of GOLE on Congress. Today we're talking with Mr. Rick Shelby, a native of Oklahoma, a longtime friend of mine. Rick has an impressive resume. He was captain in the Marine Corps, a nationally recognized political operative. He served in Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign and later briefly in his administration. Rick currently serves as the Executive Vice President of Public Affairs for the American Gas Association. He's joined us today to talk about our state and give us his insight into energy and natural gas issues. So I'm glad to have you here, but I got to start with all kinds of Rick Shelby stories. As some people who listen to this will know, Rick, of course, was a Republican state chairman, really probably the best political operative our state has ever produced. And I had the first campaign school I ever went to, Rick Shelby taught, because I was running my mother's race, and he had helped talk her into running a second time, and she was successful that time with him as state chairman. And then the seat that I currently hold, we all tried to recruit Rick to run for. He's from Chickasha, Oklahoma in 1980, and instead he, probably wisely, we needed him to help Ronald Reagan win an election or two. And it's just an amazing career you've had, Rick, just at every level of politics, an incredible commitment to the Republican Party, but much more importantly, just to your country. You see that in your service to the Marines, and it's just remarkable. So I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to have you on this show.
Well, thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for your overly generous comments. Needless to say, it just underscores once again that you are, in fact, consummate diplomat. You always say the right thing, and for those of us that need all the help we can get.
Well, you're not one of those guys, I can tell you that.
But no, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me as your guest.
Well, you're also, by the way, the first time we've had a non-member of Congress on the show, and that's frankly a tribute not only to what you're currently doing now, but just the sheer breadth of knowledge you have about American politics, about the institution of Congress and how it works. And gosh, some of the best members of Congress have had you as a consultant and an advisor and a friend. I certainly count myself among one of those people that have benefited from your wisdom over the years. So we're probably going to go a little bit further than just the energy and the gas issues, but let's start with that.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
Tell me what you do at the American Gas Association, what their role here is in Washington.
Tom, the American Gas Association is the organization that represents the natural gas local distribution companies. We have over 200 members that operate in all 50 states and provide service to over 170 million Americans. One Oak, an outstanding Oklahoma company that is headquartered in Tulsa, Oklahoma, is our largest Oklahoma member. In terms of my role, as you indicated, I have the privilege of serving as Executive Vice President, wherein I have two major responsibilities. One would be to promote the value proposition of our product, and the second is to attempt to effectively advance our advocacy priorities with the Congress and the executive branch of government at the federal level, and with state governments to the extent that we're called upon to do so.
Well, obviously the last couple of years, the focus on energy has just been tremendous up here, and it's been a terrific battle in a partisan sense and in a philosophic sense as well. I'd like to get your take on cap and trade legislation from the industry's perspective, good thing, bad thing, and then what your take is on the status of that legislation right now.
Well, as you indicated, there has been a great deal of activity in and around the issue over the course of the past year. As you well know, the legislation known as Waxman-Markey on the House side passed the House this last June, and it's currently pending in the Senate, having passed the committee that has principal jurisdiction over the issue in the Senate Environment and Public Works several weeks ago. My sense looking ahead to the end of the year is that at this point it's very unlikely that the Senate will have time to consider the legislation. And looking ahead to next year, my guess is that there's probably no more than a 25% chance that it would pass in the 111th Congress. As you look down the road, I think the likelihood of passage is greater than that. But looking at the 111th Congress, I think for a host of reasons, it's unlikely that we'll see legislation passed.
From an industry standpoint, what would the impact, if it were to pass, be on the folks that you represent? Some of obviously the major users and utilities in the country.
Well, obviously, it will depend upon what form the legislation ultimately adopts. But if you accept the underlying premise, which is that you reduce carbon by over 80% by the year 2050, obviously it could have a terribly dramatic impact upon our industry. It's one piece of legislation that could turn our world upside down for the lack of a better characterization. So we're following it very closely. We're very concerned about many of the provisions that are included in the Waxman-Markey bill, as well as in the Boxer-Kerry bill that's pending before the Senate. Having said that, we have tried to position ourselves as a constructive force in the process, in order to ensure that to the extent a bill is developed, we'll be in a position to position our industry as favorably as we possibly can as it moves forward in time.
Well, there's quite a bit of discussion, and frankly on the Democratic side as well, about natural gas being, frankly they see it as different, as cleaner than coal and petroleum, and I think some people, when they look at the numbers, just energy consumption in the United States, it's very attractive because it's largely domestic, I see some movement on the Democratic side. Our good mutual friend Dan Bourne from Oklahoma has got a natural gas bill, and obviously Boone Pickens of Oklahoma fame is out there. So there actually could be some things that two parties could actually work on together, where natural gas is concerned, that would both increase supply, make the country a little bit more energy independent, and offer a transition into other, quote, cleaner forms of energy down the road.
Absolutely. I absolutely subscribe to that view, which I'm sure comes as no surprise to you. Obviously, it's our feeling that natural gas is the preferred fuel of the current era. For many of the reasons that you just touched upon, we think that it will continue to be, at least in the short and the intermediate term. You made the point relative to the fact that it's the cleanest fossil fuel, which it is. It's roughly 45% cleaner than coal in terms of greenhouse emissions, 30% cleaner than oil. Although I would quickly interject in saying that, I'm not trying to denigrate either fuel source, because the fact of the matter is our country is going to need all the energy that we can possibly produce. Looking into the future, whether you look at any time horizon, whether it be 10, 30, 50, or 100 years, it's clear that our country, as I said, is going to need every BTU of energy that we can produce. Therefore, our mantra as it relates to energy should be diversity of supply. We're going to need it all. So in saying what I did, I certainly didn't mean to suggest that there isn't a very real need to continue to do what we can to ensure that we have sufficient supplies of those resources as well. But in addition to its cleanliness, and perhaps the most important development in the world of natural gas is its abundance. Literally, just over the course of the past 2 or 3 years, we've come to realize that we have far more abundant supplies of natural gas than we had ever realized previously. You may very well have seen the report of the Potential Gas Committee that was issued this past June, which reflected the fact that from it over and above its previous report, which had been released 2 years prior, the growth in reserves had grown by 39%. This is attributable in large part to the advent of new technologies that makes it possible for us to produce natural gas from what heretofore have been referred to as unconventional sources. It's primarily shale, but also tight sands. We now believe that we have in excess of 100 years of proven reserves of natural gas. In fact, I've become so bullish on natural gas, I'm inclined to believe that we have more natural gas than we have coal. For the last 25 or 30 years, we've talked about the fact that the United States is the Saudi Arabia of coal, which is true. We probably have 250, 300 years supply of coal. But I believe by the time all the research has been completed and we see the full effect, the full impact of the use of the new technologies that are available to us, we're going to realize that we have similar quantities of natural gas, and obviously this is a very positive development. From a standpoint of the U.S., just one final word. Obviously, it's important from a standpoint of our energy security, but I think it's important to note also that there are two corollary points that are equally important. One is the fact that it also undergirds our economic security, and even more importantly, perhaps, is the fact that it contributes to our national security. To the extent that we can rely on a domestic resource, as you pointed out, natural gas is roughly 98% of all the gas that we use in America comes from North America, 85% from the U.S., 13% from Canada. But to the extent that we can increase our use of natural gas, it makes us less reliant on unstable overseas sources of energy.
Well, and there are so many jobs associated with the industry. It's one of the things that just mystifies me, because we actually get pretty good help in a bipartisan sense on some energy issues from non-traditional Republican or conservative sources. Labor unions, Teamsters, look, they get it.
Absolutely.
Drilling and transporting natural gas is important to job creation here. The development of the internal infrastructure in the United States is going to create a lot of jobs for a lot of skilled workers. So it's just a no-brainer. I've been surprised, frankly, that we have not been able to find more in common to move this sort of technology forward from a governmental standpoint, from a policy standpoint. It seems to me it's natural. You could literally break natural gas out of the other energy questions and find a constituency for it, because it's clearly going to lower greenhouse emissions. It's clearly going to increase American energy independence. It certainly provides jobs and revenue for government at a variety of levels. Why have we not been able to find a bipartisan coalition on natural gas that, for other reasons, is somewhat more elusive than the other carbon-based fuels?
Mm-hmm. As you would expect, there's not a simple answer to the threshold question that you've raised, but rather there are a series of factors that have created the situation that has existed. One we've already talked about, and that's the issue of abundance. Prior to the realization that we had far more gas than we realized at the time, there was a reticence to use this preferred fuel for certain applications. You may recall Secretary Bodman's observation several years ago when he said the use of natural gas to generate electricity is the equivalent of using fine malt whiskey to wash dishes. But now with this abundance that we have, many of those concerns have dissipated and are no longer relevant. Additionally, you have very real fragmentation within the natural gas industry. In Washington alone, we have 5 different trade associations that represent different segments of the industry. And I think all too frequently we've been guilty of not being as disciplined and focused as we need to be in ensuring that there was a consistent message that would resonate with all of our target audiences. But I think in the last year, in part due to the ongoing efforts of industry and the trade associations such as AGA that represent certain stakeholders, but also frankly attributable in part to the special efforts that the Clean Skies Foundation and Boone Pickens initiative have had in terms of bringing resources to bear to focus on the role that natural gas can play in our future, that people are beginning to understand. Not only that it is a preferred fuel, but that it can play a far greater role in helping our country to meet its energy needs as we move on into the 21st century.
Are you seeing any break on the within the environmental community to begin to sit down, particularly where natural gas is concerned, and have a discussion about, I'm like you, I'm an all of the above energy kind of guy, and I'm certainly not critical of petroleum, not critical of coal. I'm glad we've got them. But this is one where literally you can bring different sides together that normally are not. Are you seeing any openings from our friends who normally have a problem with any kind of fossil fuel?
Yes, frankly, there is not only an increase but an ongoing dialogue with our friends in the environmental community. There have been a number of instances in which they have supported our initiatives. Most recently in regard to the direct use of natural gas. By direct use, I mean the use of natural gas at the burner tips to heat our homes, to heat our water, to cook our food. This is the best use of our product because it ensures that the greatest BTU equivalent of the energy is directed into positive uses. The NRDC, for example, has endorsed our efforts in this area. But that's just one example. Again, going back to your threshold question, there is a far broader discussion with those organizations that represent the environmental community, and that's one of the reasons why I continue to be cautiously optimistic that we are going to see action legislation, I should say, adopted by the Congress that is going to place added emphasis on the use of natural gas to meet the very daunting challenges facing our nation in the years ahead.
The biggest concern that I tend to hear from in the environmental community is no longer, as it was a few years ago, air quality. I mean, it's sort of, but it's the whole issue of fracking wells and the use of water and high pressure to break rock. And does that have any? Now, obviously, that's a little bit off your association's area, but I would think you're pretty much interested in anything that impacts supply. So, have you seen? What's your view of where the Congress is headed in terms of that type of issue?
As usual, your instincts are absolutely correct. We are very supportive of any legislation that's going to increase access, increase supply, because we know that the laws of economics have not been reversed, that the only way that we're going to ensure that the costs to our customers, the end users of our product, doesn't increase is by ensuring that there is an adequate supply of natural gas. So we support anything that's going to result in greater supply. And in regard to the topic that we talked about a moment ago, i.e. the abundance of the product, you just touched upon the one thing that could negatively affect our ability to ensure that we do have adequate resources. I referred to the advent of new technologies that has made it possible to produce natural gas from shale, from tar sands, and was in fact talking in large part about fracking. It's also the use of horizontal and directional drilling, and there are other elements, but the single most important of all the things that have made this possible is the fracking process that you just touched upon. And as you pointed out correctly, there is legislation pending in the Congress that would serve to complicate the use of this new technology in order to produce natural gas from these unconventional sources. And that is one thing that could again dramatically affect or change the dynamics of the supply picture. So we're very concerned about it. We're following it very closely and hopeful that the issue doesn't gain traction. Right now, there isn't a lot of support for the issue in the Congress, but obviously, given its potential impact upon our industry, we are following it very closely and are very concerned about it.
Let me pull you away from energy for a moment and just give our audience the benefit of your really broad experience in watching Congress operate. You've been intimately involved with it in one capacity or another for pushing 30 years now.
It's very disconcerting.
Disconcerting. Yeah, and you look so great. And you know, I tell our audience, a Rick Shelby handshake is still an experience to remember, because it's legendary in terms of the firmness of the grip. But
Marine Corps made me do too many push-ups.
Well, you must still do a few. Let me ask you this: it's always difficult, complex, to move legislation to the Congress of the United States, but we do have now. We have one party essentially in control. We have a Democratic president, Democratic House, Democratic Senate. Not very long ago, we had Republican president, House, Senate. You go back to the era of Ronald Reagan, where you had divided government really all the way through, and yet he was very successful legislatively when he had a Republican Senate, and even the last couple of years when he was facing a Democratic controlled House and Senate. So has it gotten more difficult to get things done in Washington, D.C., in the congressional arena, or was Ronald Reagan just a pretty exceptional leader?
Well, of course, it won't surprise you to hear me say that I think President Reagan was a pretty exceptional leader in every sense of the word, and I think that had a great deal to do with the very real success that he enjoyed during his presidency. But I don't know that I would subscribe to the view that it's become more difficult. I think it's always been very difficult. In fact, I tell our members frequently when we're discussing legislative initiatives, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And I don't have to tell you that the legislative process is an incremental process in every sense of the word, and sometimes, particularly on major pieces of legislation like the energy bill, EPAC, that finally passed in 2005, you'll work on these bills for 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 Congresses. And it's just a question of building upon the residual base that you've developed going back to the outset of the effort, and hopefully finally stitching together the 50% plus one that you need in order to achieve success. So my response, I guess, would be, as I said, that it's always been difficult. And I think for all practical purposes, will always be difficult. If you're talking again about major legislative initiatives, if you're talking about things that are less important, obviously that's an altogether different proposition.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I sometimes think people forget that Madison designed it to be this way from the very beginning. That was the best defense against liberty, was the fragmentation of power and to make it difficult. And when you hear the talk about partisanship, I always think, well, gosh, you must not have grown up in the 60s or in the Nixon era. I mean, yes, we have a partisan town, but the idea that it's somehow fundamentally more partisan than it was during the tumultuous 1960s and during the Nixon presidency into the 70s, I think is a real misreading of history. It is not tougher and harder now than it was during the throes of Watergate or again, the cultural and political crises of the 1960s.
No, I totally agree with you. I absolutely subscribe to that view. I think, as you indicated, when people make that observation, probably more often than not, it's attributable to the fact that haven't taken the longer short-term overview that you just outlined.
Well, recently we've heard a lot. I'm going to ask you, as a political practitioner, we've heard a lot about the death of the two-party system, or there's a new coalition that has emerged with President Obama's election, and the Republican Party is going to be marginalized. How do you see the health of the two-party system right now, and do you see a permanent realignment in American politics shaping up, or are we just in part of the normal ebb and flow between the two parties?
I think I would associate myself with the latter characterization. I think the two-party system is alive and well. I think it's as vibrant as it's ever been. Obviously, it's a year to the midterm election, but if I had to guess today, my guess is that it'll be a good year to be on the ballot as a Republican candidate. Again, it's awfully early, but my guess is on the House side, Republicans will get at least halfway back to the majority. And as surprising as it is to me now, vis-a-vis where I thought Republicans were on the Senate side earlier in the year, I don't think it's at all unlikely that Republicans might pick up 1 or 2 Senate seats in this election cycle. So I think, frankly, by this time next year, we're going to see a return to equilibrium, perhaps not complete equilibrium, but the imbalances that exist at the moment, I think, will be rather significantly corrected in the midterm election.
Well, and it's we've only got a couple minutes, but it's an interesting period, like your observation quickly, and it's an era of great debates. I mean, we're in the middle of a great debate on health care, a great debate on energy, a great debate on American foreign policy in terms of Afghanistan and Iraq and terror, and it's not like we're
not to mention the role of government.
Yeah,
and
the size, that's right, the debt, and so I mean, this is actually an era of big issues, a Reagan-esque era. Ronald Reagan lived in a time of big issues and made a big difference. Mm-hmm. So, in about a minute, where do you see us going on big issues?
Well, obviously, if I knew, I would be doing something other than that I am doing. But for what it's worth, my guess is that at the end of the day, something with health care in the title will pass the Congress. I don't think it's going to look anything like what was envisioned by the administration at the outset of the 111th Congress. But I just think that the President has so much time, effort, political capital invested in the issue that it's likely that they will make whatever concessions they need to make in order to ensure that health care legislation does pass. In regard to climate, as I indicated earlier, I certainly don't expect climate legislation to pass this year. I think it's highly unlikely that it would pass next year. If it is to pass, I think the most likely scenario would be in the first half of 2011.
We're going to bring you back sometime as an old Marine, too, to talk about foreign policy and somebody that helped Ronald Reagan fashion the foreign policy that won the Cold War. But, Rick, it's been great to have you, and I hope our viewers have enjoyed this episode. I know they have. And just thanks for your friendship and all you've done for our country over the years.
Well, thank you for having me as your guest. I enjoyed it very much.
Thanks.